Well, if you're a Final Fantasy fan like myself, chances are you're probably pretty hyped about the next year or so. Because we've got not one, not two, but three Final Fantasy games releasing. Final Fantasy XVI, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and Crisis Core Final Fantasy Reunion are coming our way. The drought will be over, folks, and we'll all be enjoying ourselves while hanging out with Cloud, Zack, and a whole cast of newcomers from 16. It's strange because for a while there I actually thought Final Fantasy VII Rebirth would be delayed for a year or more beyond Final Fantasy XVI. I really thought it would take them longer to finish it. But hey, I'm not going to complain about it. I'm happy to hear it's shaping up well, and we don't have to wait 8 years for them to finish like 4 other remake games just to complete Final Fantasy VII. The fact that it's a trilogy of games probably means these next two are going to be quite beefy in the story department. Though I'm not going to start counting any chickens before they've hatched. Honestly, it's just crazy to think about. I've never felt this positive about the direction Final Fantasy as a franchise was going. I only hope that after all the waiting, we're not going to be left disappointed by Rebirth or Final Fantasy XVI. It's really quite funny. In a way, the announcement that came out of the summer which got me most excited about Final Fantasy was actually the Crisis Core remaster. You wouldn't know this, but Crisis Core is actually one of the few Final Fantasy games I haven't played. So the opportunity to play not only a port of the game, but a beautiful graphical remaster, it's got me super anxious. Better yet, the game is releasing this year. It probably won't actually come out until December if I had to guess. Still, that's a game which is really high on my list of anticipated titles. As far as I'm aware, this title will more or less just be a remaster. Apparently things won't be retconned for the sake of Final Fantasy Remake continuity, and Nomura has said that they felt it wasn't right to call it a Crisis Core remake. So for anyone concerned it's going to drastically alter the story of the original, I don't think that's the case. As far as Final Fantasy XVI goes, we haven't had much in the way of news for this one since the summer showcases. However, I bet we'll get an update with more footage or something before the year is out. Perhaps we'll see it at the Tokyo Game Show. If not then, perhaps the Game Awards in December. But in general, Final Fantasy XVI does look like it follows in the footsteps of titles like Final Fantasy XII in a spiritual sense. Personally, I hope that's the case. Just thinking about a Final Fantasy title, kind of in the vein of 12, but with far more visceral and mature elements to it, well, that's really what's got me hyped for 16. I want to experience another game like Type 0, a game that doesn't hold back and isn't afraid of being really dark. I truly believe Final Fantasy XVI could be that game. Hopefully, anyway. I guess seeing Final Fantasy XV's uneven tone made me even more anxious to see 16 nail its tone when it releases. As far as the world and combat of 16 goes, I'm pretty open-minded about things. I would be fine with an open world, or even if it were just open-ended mission levels featuring explorable areas. It doesn't really matter to me. If the combat is more fast-paced and hack-and-slash in nature, I'll be perfectly okay with it. As some of you may already know from previous videos, I actually like the combat system of Final Fantasy VII Remake quite a lot. But I think we can tell from what we've seen thus far, it's not going to be anything like that. So, verdict's still out on Final Fantasy XVI. Will it finally be the mainline Final Fantasy title which brings back the prestige of the franchise? Because as much as I love the 13 trilogy and even Final Fantasy 15, the only games that have really brought something respectable to the table which feel like the good old days are Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy VII Remake. Technically speaking, those games don't officially count because 14 isn't a traditional single-player title, and 7 Remake is, well, a remake of an older classic. I really hope that Square Enix brings out the big guns with 16. At the very least, the Final Fantasy franchise deserves to see a return to glory. Perhaps now is the perfect time. Of course, there's still Final Fantasy VII Rebirth to consider. The trailer we were shown for the game was a lot less meaty than some of the Final Fantasy XVI trailers. I got the feeling the overall goal of that initial teaser was to have a sense of mystique and wonder about it, with cryptic language to confuse us a bit. The lines of dialogue they chose were entirely without context, so they could mean basically anything with regards to the plot. To my understanding, this game might end up being open world, but they don't seem ready to reveal it just yet. Truth be told, much like 16, I don't really have a preference for whether it's open world or not, but something that caught my eye was the statement that they have a policy of not cutting content with respect to the original. So according to the information the devs are putting out there, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will not be excluding chunks of the original story in order to fit the entirety of it into 3 games. Honestly, let's hope that is the case. It would be nice to see them revisit a number of scenes and locales without making any cuts. I know they'll be hearing about it if they cut something fans love, and I think they know that too. However, it seems the order of events might have been altered, given how much the Final Fantasy VII Remake added to the original narrative. I think it's safe to say there will be some cause for changes in events and pacing. Right now, I'm at a point where part of me wants to be surprised and for things to impress me with some fresh creativity. However, there's another part of me that wants to see the original respected no matter what. It's a wild guess trying to make sense of Rebirth at this stage. It's simply too early to have any concrete notion of its nature. I guess my only complete thoughts on it are ones of cautious anticipation. But it's safe to say the future of Final Fantasy is looking really exciting. I can't wait for it to arrive. But why don't you let me know what you all think in the comments section down below. Thank you so much for watching this video, I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, clicking that like button, and hitting that little bell for notifications so you don't miss out on any new videos as soon as they drop. Thank you so much, and have yourself a great day.